very excited about a new book and speaking to accompanying it. The book is called Tatau Pounamu, The Treaty of Waitangi, a Covenant of Reconciliation by Dr. Alistair Reese. He joins us on the program now. Kia ora, good morning. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for the invitation.
In terms of the what the book is about or the reason for it, what inspired you to take this step to tell this story?
I was invited to put some things into writing that I shared at Waitangi earlier this year, Andrew, on Waitangi Day at the dawn service. Some things that I spoke there seemed to resonate with people, so I was invited to write down and extrapolate a bit further on that. So that was the genesis of the idea behind the book.
Certainly a powerful presentation at Waitangi this year, and a strong response both from the people there and subsequent to that, people that saw that message. It was wonderful personally being able to be there and see the response from the crowd, including some people that were, well, pretty angry with some government policy.
Yeah, it certainly seems to have reverberated around the motu, and I've actually been quite surprised at how extensive the hearing was. Actually, people would talk to me around the place and say, "Oh, I heard your talk. And I'm just surprised that people actually at 5 o'clock in the morning or however, people all around the motu are actually tuning into that.
Yeah, exactly. And if they didn't see it live, I know the Shine TV crew were filming it, and people can watch it at the Shine TV website. Not a plug for the station, but if people wanted to access that more. In terms of turning it into a book and the speaking tour, certainly some wonderful conversation starters, and one of the things which I think is well, appropriate and distinctive about this book. It's bilingual. It is in both English and Te Reo Māori, as was the treaty, although some people disagree on the translation. We'll get to that in a moment. But the approach to make it a bilingual book, was that an early part of the process?
Yeah, that was one of the markers or one of the po that I set down when I talked to the people who were wanting to publish it, Andrew, that was something that I really was keen to do. I think that's important that we lay that bilingual approach as a foundation to the kind of korero that we're wanting to have.
Talking about some of the content from this, now there are Māori who are, as I mentioned, who are pretty angry at some of the government policy, some that are pretty disenfranchised from the church and what happened back in the day, or even what's happening with the church now. But in the book you talk about how with the treaty there were not just two, but three voices at the treaty table. Unpack that idea for us, Alistair.
Yes, Andrew, that's one of the key ideas behind the book that I feel that I want to bring to public attention, is the fact that, as I've stressed, the key issue for me is not to, in a sense, redeem the reputation of the church, but to actually explore what was said and what was explained in 1840, so that we can understand further the ethos, the undergirdings of the treaty as they were communicated by the Crown via CMS missionaries, particularly Henry Williams Karuwha. So that's the intention, is to actually understand how the church mediated and explained and emphasised the benefits of the treaty to Māori. So that I call it the third voice at the treaty table, which for a variety of reasons has been silent in the main part for a long time. And so my goal is to restore, I think, some of the perhaps lesser known aspects around the treaty in order to help our public conversation going forward.
One of the things that you mentioned in your address at Waitangi, and also the theme carried strongly through the book as well, you talked about the Treaty of Waitangi being actually a love letter from Queen Victoria to the people of Aotearoa. Certainly the way in which Te Tiriti has been presented and the way it's looked at, it seems to be creating more dissension, more division than aroha, perhaps.
Yes, I think it's somewhat counterintuitive, isn't it, to think of treaty politics and inject the word love, Andrew. But I think that if we, as a theological people, that we have some resources to actually unpack what love means, particularly we look at some of the terms, for example, that I think, or the meaning undergirding what Henry Williams would have meant when he said this was an expression of love. He would have been referring to agape, which we know is the term that was expressed by Jesus for us all to be able to express our attitude to others. And it was epitomized, of course, by his own sacrificial work on the cross. And so that was an expression of agape. And I'm wanting to undergird the treaty with that kind of ethos.
When we look back at the history of, well, since the treaty, from the treaty until now, often the treaty is seen in terms of, well, not an act of love, but an act of betrayal, both from the Crown and from the Church to an extent. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, I think it is very fair. And I mean, we're generalizing, of course, this morning, but let's just concentrate on the church for a minute. For over 100 years, the church was pretty silent in terms of reinforcing the claims of the treaty, and this in spite of the fact that the church was primarily responsible for mediating the meaning of the treaty to Māori in the first instance.
Yeah. With that, I suppose that interpretive role, this is perhaps one of the sticking points, not just of history, but of conversations now about what Te Tiriti meant back in the day, what it means for us now as a nation going forward. There's lots of contention about whether or not we can even ask questions about that. This is something which you delve into, the different viewpoints on the text of the treaty, whether or not there was an accurate translation, for example.
I think it's important to note, Andrew, that my approach is essentially to bring people to the treaty in the first instance. Yeah. One of the things I'm a little bit concerned about is that people come to the treaty, and I call us Johnny-come-latelys, and we seek to interpret a second article, first article, and we seek to do that before we actually imbibe and sit with the treaty and understand what it is. And that's why I've spent some time in the book and in the talking around the motu, around the tapu, the sacred nature of the treaty. It's a covenant, and so that we would be apprehended by the sobriety of that before we actually feel like we can just step in and then make some judgments and I think in a lot of the judgments are actually uninformed judgments, or they're latter judgments without actually going into the depth of the history of the treaty. So in response to your question, my first exhortation is for people to sit with the treaty, and let the treaty speak to you in terms of its context, let it speak to you in terms of its wider application, its reconciliatory mechanisms, and all of those things, and also understanding something of this. It's a missive of love, of agape, and then perhaps seek to understand what kawanatanga, rangatiratanga, sovereignty means, because those are big concepts, and they're not simple concepts that we can just quickly understand and quickly read. So I'm exhorting us, particularly the church, I guess, to say, let's take some time with us, with this, and let's make up for lost time, and let's listen carefully before we're actually too quick to pronounce our own expertise into something that perhaps we don't have an expertise over.
I've heard it said that Te Tiriti is as much, if not more, a relational document or a spiritual document rather than a legal or a constitutional one. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that, Andrew. And one of my proposals in it is that I've said it's a political document, it's a cultural document, but it's also a theological document. And so that's, again, where I feel that the church has a voice by the providence of God to have an input into the present conversation, and hopefully, Andrew, an invitation to enter into the conversations in the future. I think that's important, that we as a church regain some of the mana that we had in the early years, that we might be actually perhaps called upon to add a voice of wisdom into the midst of the present conflict. Now, that would be something, wouldn't it?
Certainly. And some people might think, well, gosh, is it any business of the church to be involved with this? Yes, the missionaries were involved back in the day, but when asking where is the church, perhaps another way of looking at it is, do we have the right? Have we earned the right? Do we have the mana to speak on this important issue? Would we be welcome to share our views, do you think?
Yes, I think there's 2 points you raised there, Andrew. Firstly is a theological question, and perhaps that's one of the reasons for our absence from the table for many sections of the church, because theologically they ask the question that perhaps some of the early missionaries asked: what has politics got to do with religion, or what has religion got to do with politics? So those are theological questions that people need to grapple with. The other one you asked is about mana, and I completely agree. We cannot force ourselves to have a position at the table. I think it's something that requires an invitation, and that's an exhortation for us to the leaders around the nation, is to walk humbly within that.
When it comes to, I suppose, what honouring the treaty looks like, and not making a political statement here, but I suppose as the body of Christ and as individuals who are followers of Jesus, Alistair, what do you believe honouring the treaty looks like for us? How do we engage with this?
Well, I think first of all, that one needs to make their own conclusion about, is the treaty something that still needs to be honoured? Is it current? And if we look at it from a covenantal point of view, I think that helps us understand that, yes, it has some currency. It's not just a contract that has a use-by date. But I think if we go back to the agape concept, and that's why I think it's quite important, Andrew, is that if we look at an agape relationship, one of the ways I would explain it is that we desire the highest good of the other. Yeah. So my exhortation would be that those who are tangata tiriti, or within the Crown's auspices of being a treaty person, then our desire is always to sacrificially to seek the highest good of the other. Yeah. It's not an assertion in the first instance of our own rights. It's actually an assertion of our desire to see the other person prosper. And that's why I think the church is actually so well placed to be able to walk into this kaupapa, because we're equipped with that sacrificial, that servanthood theological foundation in the way that we seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness. So, yeah, of all peoples, I think we should understand that kind of an attitude.
The book, He Tatau Pounamu, the Treaty of Waitangi, a Covenant of Reconciliation. Now, I mean, that in essence sums up a lot of what we've been talking about, seeing the treaty as a covenant of reconciliation that may have been the motivation or the goals of the missionary involvement back in 1840. But is it a bit of an aspirational goal now that Te Tiriti could still continue to be a covenant of reconciliation in these perhaps fractious times?
Andrew, you might recall there's a well-known proverb. It says something like, without a vision, the people cast off restraint. Yeah. King Itafiao actually reiterated that to his own people, that Waikato Tainui. And so I think that the need for visionary goals are actually really important for society. And yes, they are aspirational, and some people may think that they're outside of our capacity. But without that visionary goal, certainly the proverb is true. We just do what's right in our own eyes.
No, certainly. Now, the book is out, getting a fantastic response, I understand, and also speaking to, based on these same themes. Now, events in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, events to come in Tauranga and Hamilton, I understand. What's been the response, Alistair, both from the speaking tour so far and the book? What sort of response and feedback are you getting?
Yeah, I call it a Kairos time, Andrew. I mean, it's definitely it's a season to be concerned and talking about these things. I've been surprised going around the country. I'll give you an example. The last one we did was in the cathedral in Christchurch, and we were packed to capacity.
Wow. 300
people on a cold Tuesday night, and so that gives some ideas to the kind of I think the hunger that people have to understand more.
Yeah.
And so we'll be speaking at Holy Trinity next Wednesday night in Tauranga, and then at Te Rautini in Hamilton on the following day and Thursday night. So if people in those places would like to come in here, and I would really enjoy to see them there.
No, that'd be really good indeed. And for people that want to pick up copies of the book, what's the best way of doing that, Alistair?
venn.org. .nz, that's the publishing arm, venn.org. If they just Google that, they'll be able to they'll find it on their website.
Such an important conversation. We've only been able to dip our toes in the water of this one. Alistair, thank you for the work that you do, the wisdom that you bring, and thank you for taking the time to share that with us today.
Andrew, always appreciate your interest. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.